The night was a haunting symphony of chaos, a symphony orchestrated by a young man teetering on the edge of madness. With a loaded gun and a reckless heart, 19-year-old Anthony Gelia was moments away from transforming a quiet home into a scene of unimaginable horror. The air crackled with tension as he ranted to a Facebook Live audience, the chilling prelude to a tragedy that would leave a family shattered. But what drove Anthony to such a dark place? Was it a vendetta against phantoms of his own making, or did someone else pull the strings of this bloody overture? As the clock ticked closer to the fateful moment, the truth seemed more elusive than ever, hidden beneath layers of intoxication, paranoia, and a name that lingered ominously: Anastasia. In the shadows of a quiet neighborhood, the air was thick with a peculiar unease. November nights in Jackson, Michigan, could be especially cold, but there was something more chilling than the temperature that evening. The dull glow from 1,000 streetlights seemed to cast a spotlight on the darkened street, where Anthony Gelia sat in his car, his mind a storm of incoherent thoughts and liquid courage. His hand trembled slightly as it grasped the gun, the metal cold against his skin. With glazed eyes, he stared into the camera of his phone, streaming his every thought to the faceless spectators of an online audience, who could only watch in bewilderment, perhaps unable to grasp the reality of what was unfolding. The night had begun like many others for Anthony, a series of poor decisions layered upon a foundation of unresolved anger and paranoia. But this night was different. It was a culmination of spiraling impulses fueled by alcohol and resentment. As he hurtled toward an irreversible decision, the remnants of reason battled against a tide of chaos in his mind. It was here, in the solitude of his vehicle, that Anthony's fractured reality blurred the lines between truth and delusion. The streets of Jackson were silent, each house a bastion of warm lights and closed doors, a stark contrast to the turmoil inside Anthony's car. He was 19, yet in those moments he seemed ageless, a blend of raw, unbridled youth and the hardened edge of despair. The gun felt like an extension of himself, a manifestation of his inner turmoil, and as he waved it on camera, his words were a jumbled mix of bravado and vulnerability. "I got one in the chamber right now," he announced, his voice tinged with a bravado that was more performance than authenticity. Anthony's mind was a tangled web of disjointed narratives, where reality and fantasy were disturbingly indistinct. The name Anastasia floated through his consciousness like a specter, taunting him with its mystery. To Anthony, she was more than a name. She was a phantom threat, a symbol of his paranoia. His thoughts twisted around her like a vine choking the life from a tree. In his intoxicated state, Anastasia was an enigma he couldn't untangle, a danger he couldn't define, and yet she was nowhere and everywhere. As his car idled, Anthony's mind turned to thoughts of vengeance, revenge against threats real or imagined. His brother, Noah, was a thread in this tapestry of madness, woven through the narrative of betrayal and anger. Noah's supposed involvement with Anastasia, or her mythical accomplices, fueled Anthony's rage. It didn't matter that the connections were tenuous at best. In Anthony's reality, they were as solid as the gun in his hand. The cold logic of the situation would have dictated caution, but Anthony was far beyond listening to reason. His world had shrunk to the confines of his car, to the screen of his phone, and to the gun he held. The viewers of his live stream were witness to the unraveling of a mind under immense pressure, each second ticking closer to a choice that could not be undone. As he muttered threats and confessions into the void, the audience could do nothing but watch, horrified and helpless. The idea of protection, of preemptive self-defense, fueled Anthony's justification, however flawed. The notion that he was the prey rather than the predator allowed him to rationalize the irrational. In his mind, he was not just a young man with a gun. He was a knight readying himself for battle against unseen foes. Yet, as the night wore on, it became clear that Anthony's greatest enemy was the reflection staring back at him from the phone screen. When the car door finally opened, spilling Anthony into the night, The clock was already ticking down to tragedy. The cool November air hit his face, a momentary jolt of clarity that was quickly swallowed by the storm of his emotions. With purposeful strides, he moved toward his destination, a house that symbolized all his fears and anger. Behind its walls lay the unsuspecting family, their lives about to be irrevocably changed. In those final moments before the chaos, the neighborhood stood silent, the calm before a storm. The stage was set for a tragedy neither scripted nor foreseen, a collision of lives and choices that would echo long after the night faded into the dawn. As Anthony approached the house, gun in hand, the line between reality and delusion vanished entirely, leaving only the stark, unforgiving truth of what he was about to do. As Anthony Gelia stumbled out of his car and into the cold November night, each breath forming a fleeting cloud in the frigid air, his steps were heavy with the weight of his delusions. The gun in his hand, once a mere object of intimidation, had now become a physical embodiment of his fractured psyche. The neighborhood, cloaked in a deceptive tranquility, was about to become the backdrop for a tragic act spurred by a confluence of alcohol, paranoia, and unresolved anger. The house loomed in front of him, a silhouette against the night sky, its windows darkened and silent. Inside, the Southwell family was cocooned in their evening routine, blissfully unaware of the looming danger. Anthony's mind was a tempest, the name Anastasia echoing like a discordant melody, feeding his deranged narrative. The details of her existence were as elusive as the shadowed corners of his mind. Yet to Anthony, she was the catalyst for his perceived persecution. She was the puppet master pulling invisible strings, manipulating an unseen army poised to destroy him. This delusion had taken root, growing wild and unchecked within the confines of his liquored haze. As Anthony approached the house, the stillness was palpable, broken only by the rhythmic crunch of leaves underfoot. His heart pounded in rhythm with his footsteps, each beat a reminder of the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He paused at the door, the threshold between his chaotic thoughts and the unsuspecting family within. His senses were heightened, every fiber of his being taut with anticipation, yet dulled by the alcohol that fueled his courage. Inside, Brittany Southwell was cradling her infant, the gentle hum of a lullaby filling the room. Her older children were nearby, their laughter an innocent melody against the backdrop of a life that was about to be shattered. The door suddenly gave way with a thunderous crash, the sound reverberating through the house like a gunshot. Anthony stood framed in the doorway, his silhouette a harbinger of violence, the gun in his hand a terrible promise. In the chaos that ensued, time seemed to stretch and warp, each second laden with terror and confusion. Brittany's instinct to protect her child was immediate, a primal determination that drove her to shield her baby from the danger that had breached their sanctuary. In those heart-stopping moments, Anthony's reality, twisted and tainted by fear and delusion, reached its horrific apex. He fired the gun in frenzied succession, the sound cracking through the air, each shot a grotesque punctuation to his madness. The bullets tore through the fabric of the night, one finding its devastating mark in Brittany's back. She stumbled, the world slowing to a cruel crawl as she fell, her child still in her arms, her life ebbing away amidst the panicked screams and cries that seemed to echo from a place far removed. Her fiancé, Tyler, rushed to her side, the world falling away as he cradled her, whispering words of love and desperation, willing her to stay, to hold on, as life slipped through the fragile hold of those final moments. Outside, the neighborhood remained eerily silent, the horror within the house a stark contrast to the calm that cloaked the street. As the reality of his actions began to permeate his consciousness, Anthony found himself at the mercy of the very chaos he had unleashed. The gun, now a damning weight in his hand, was no longer an instrument of power, but a shackle binding him to his irreversible choice. In the aftermath, law enforcement descended upon the scene with swift precision, the blue and red flashes of their lights casting a surreal glow on the faces of the onlookers who had gathered, drawn by the cacophony of sirens and screams. In mere minutes, Anthony was apprehended. The car that had served as his fortress of delusion, now an incriminating beacon in the night. The live stream that had borne witness to his descent into madness served as indisputable evidence, cementing the path that would lead to his conviction. Yet amid the tragedy, questions lingered, suspended in the cold night air. Who was Anastasia? Was she a figment of Anthony's fractured mind, a scapegoat for his spiraling paranoia, or did she exist beyond the confines of his imagination? As Anthony was led away, the weight of his actions bore down, a somber testament to a mind undone by its own demons. The night had swallowed its share of innocence, leaving behind an irrevocable void, a family broken, and a young man condemned to a lifetime of reflection on a senseless act that forever altered the tapestry of lives entwined. The dull hum of fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow on the small interrogation room where Anthony Gelia sat, hands cuffed in front of him, a stark contrast to the chaotic night just hours before. His disheveled appearance was a testament to the turmoil of alcohol-soaked decisions and misfired intentions. The cold metal of the chair he occupied was a sobering reality, much like the questions that loomed ahead. His eyes, bloodshot and haunted by the echoes of the night's events, darted nervously as the detective settled into the chair opposite him. "Let's talk about what happened, Anthony," the detective began, his voice a blend of authority and casual composure designed to encourage honesty. The room was quiet, save for the occasional shuffle of paper and the distant murmur of voices beyond the door. Anthony's fingers twitched, a treacherous reminder of the weapon they had once held. He could still feel the ghostly weight of the gun, its presence a grim reminder of the irreversible path he had carved through a night that should have been unremarkable. "Honestly, I got drunk off my ass," Anthony started, the words spilling from him in a slurry of regret and defensiveness. "I don't ever drink. I had a bean and cheese burrito from Taco Bell, and I went to Stark's party. After that, things just spiraled." The detective's eyes narrowed slightly, a sign he was listening intently, cataloging each word, each pause, for inconsistencies or truths. The air in the room was stagnant, heavy with anticipation and the faint undertone of cleaning solvents. "You've been honest about that, Anthony. But what about the gun? What about Brittany?" The detective's tone was probing, yet measured, seeking to navigate the labyrinth of Anthony's fractured recollections. "I don't know who Brittany is. I never knew her," Anthony retorted, frustration creeping into his voice. "I was looking for someone else. Anastasia. She was in my head, threatening me with guys saying they were going to kill me." "Anastasia?" The detective leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Who is she, Anthony? Does she even exist?" The question lingered, hanging in the air like a challenging specter, daring Anthony to confront the possibility that Anastasia was merely a figment of his drunken paranoia, a specter conjured by his own insecurities and fears. Anthony hesitated, the room closing in on him as he grappled with the truth. "I don't know," he admitted finally, his voice a whisper of defeat. "She was real to me last night, real enough to make me grab that gun and go looking." Outside the confines of the interrogation room, the world continued its indifferent march forward. But within those four walls, time seemed suspended, every tick of the clock echoing the gravity of the conversation. Each moment was a narrow bridge between innocence and guilt, reality and illusion. The detective leaned back, his chair creaking softly as he assessed the young man before him. "Anthony, there are no records of an Anastasia threatening you. What you did last night, breaking into that house, shooting at those people, it's serious. It's real. And it has consequences." The truth hit like a hammer, each word driving home the reality that Anthony had been trying to evade. His mind drifted back to the moment he had kicked in the door, the surge of adrenaline, the blinding flash of gunfire. And then the aftermath, the cries, the chaos, the realization of a life snuffed out in a senseless act of violence. Across the table, the detective's gaze never wavered, steady and unyielding. Anthony felt the weight of his actions settle around him, a suffocating cloak of responsibility. He had been ensnared by his own mind, a prisoner to his fears and delusions, and now the walls of his new reality were closing in. In the silence that followed, the enormity of the tragedy hung heavy, an invisible specter that would haunt them all. The detective, the family shattered by loss, and Anthony, condemned to a lifetime of reflection on a nightmare he alone had conjured. The night, once filled with imagined threats, had claimed innocence and left in its wake a chilling reminder of a mind unhinged, a life irrevocably altered, and a young man forever trapped by the demons he could not escape. The air in the room seemed to thicken with the gravity of Anthony's words, as though the very walls absorbed the portent of the night's grim events. Outside, the world continued its indifferent cadence, the passing cars and distant hum of city life a stark contrast to the suffocating silence that enveloped the small interrogation room. In this suspended reality, Anthony was caught between the tangible evidence of his actions and the ephemeral specter of his fears, a shadowy figure named Anastasia. The detective's gaze was unwavering, a lighthouse in the storm of Anthony's convoluted narrative. Anastasia, Anthony repeated, his voice barely more than a whisper, as if invoking her name might conjure her from the ether. It was a name steeped in mystery, hanging in the air like a mist, impenetrable and elusive. Anthony's mind, still muddled from the remnants of alcohol and adrenaline, grasped at the intangible threads of that night, trying to weave them into some semblance of coherence. Outside the windowless room, the night stretched its fingers across the city, pulling a shroud of darkness over the chaos that lay just beyond its borders. The fluorescent lights buzzed intermittently, casting a sterile glow that only heightened the surreal quality of Anthony's recounting. His eyes, still red-rimmed and weary, flickered with the desperation of a man trapped in a waking dream. "She was real to me," Anthony insisted, as much to himself as to the detective. He could see her in his mind's eye, a figure cloaked in shadows, her voice a siren's call leading him to the jagged cliffs of his own unraveling. She was an echo in his thoughts, a whisper that had grown louder with each drink, each reckless decision that had led him to that fateful confrontation. The detective leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as if to pierce the veil of Anthony's fragmented reality. "Do you believe she was in that house, Anthony? Or was she here?" He pointed to his temple, all along. Anthony hesitated, the question a chasm threatening to swallow him whole. The room seemed to close in, the walls pressing against him with the weight of the unanswerable. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice cracking under the strain of uncertainty. "But I felt her presence. I felt like I was being pulled, like she was guiding me." In the silence that followed, the detective considered the young man before him, a man who had woven an intricate tapestry of fantasy and fear, a man who had sought refuge in a myth of his own creation. "Anthony," the detective said gently, "what if Anastasia is just a manifestation of something else? Something inside you, something you couldn't face?" The question lingered, its implications vast and unsettling. Anthony's mind drifted through the fog of his memories, searching for clarity amidst the haze. He remembered the heat of the gun in his hand, the metallic taste of adrenaline on his tongue, the moment when fear twisted into fury. Was Anastasia the embodiment of his darkest fears, the specter of his anger and betrayal given form and voice? As the detective's words reverberated in the room, Anthony felt a shift within, a subtle rearrangement of the pieces in his mental landscape. The realization was both liberating and terrifying. The specter he had chased was perhaps not a demon lurking in the shadows, but the reflection of his own turmoil, his own unmet needs, and unresolved pain. The detective's chair creaked softly as he leaned back, his expression a mix of empathy and resolve. "We are the architects of our own demons, Anthony, and sometimes we must confront them face to face to truly see the path we've walked." Anthony closed his eyes, the enormity of the truth settling over him like a shroud. The road to redemption, if such a thing was possible, lay not in exorcising the phantom of Anastasia, but in understanding and untangling the web of his own making. It was a path shrouded in uncertainty, and yet it was the only one that offered a semblance of peace, a glimmer of light in the oppressive weight of darkness. In that dimly lit room, Anthony Gelia began the journey inward, a solitary traveler navigating the labyrinth of his own mind, searching for the threads of hope and healing amidst the wreckage of a night that had forever altered the fabric of his reality. As the detective's words hung in the air like the remnants of smoke from a freshly extinguished fire, the interrogation room became a stage for the unraveling of Anthony Gelia's delusions, a grim theater where the boundaries between reality and fiction dissolved into an indistinguishable haze. The name Anastasia had emerged as the phantom menace in Anthony's narrative, a specter that supposedly haunted his waking life and drove him to commit an act of unspeakable violence. But this phantom's existence, like a mirage shimmering on the horizon, was founded on nothing but the distorted echoes of Anthony's paranoia and inebriation. In the aftermath of Brittany Southwell's tragic death, it was Anthony's fragile psyche, not an enigmatic female presence, that bore the weight of culpability. The notion of Anastasia, conjured from the depths of Anthony's fractured mind, served as a convenient scapegoat in his desperate bid to evade responsibility. Yet, in the cold light of reality, there was no evidence, no trail of whispers or shadows, linking this phantom woman to the horrors of that night. She was a figment of Anthony's imagination, a fabricated villain in a storyline that had spiraled catastrophically out of control. The interrogation had peeled back the layers of Anthony's psyche, revealing a young man whose life was a precarious balancing act of mental health struggles and substance abuse. His claims of being threatened by Anastasia and her alleged associates were merely a smokescreen, an attempt to justify the unjustifiable. This was not a tale of self-defense against a sinister conspiracy. It was a sobering narrative of a man who had allowed his demons to dictate his reality, leading to the irreversible devastation of innocent lives. Anthony's narrative was not merely flawed. It was a testament to how far a mind, steeped in paranoia and intoxication, could stray from the truth. He had painted himself as a victim in a grand, imagined conflict, yet the real victims were those whose lives were shattered by his senseless actions. Brittany Southwell, a young mother robbed of her future, and her infant child, now destined to grow up without a mother. These were the true casualties of a night marred by Anthony's reckless delusions. As the detective skillfully deconstructed Anthony's account, each question posed was a hammer blow against the fragile edifice of lies and misconceptions that he had erected. Anthony's feigned ignorance of Brittany's identity and his repeated insistence on the threat posed by Anastasia only highlighted his reluctance to face the stark reality of his actions. It was easier, perhaps, to cast himself as a pawn in a larger game, orchestrated by an unseen puppeteer, than to confront the stark truth of his own culpability. The critical flaw in Anthony's defense was the absence of corroborative evidence. No trace of Anastasia could be found. No records, no eyewitness accounts, no validation of her existence beyond Anthony's fevered assertions. In the end, it was the evidence of his own actions, chronicled in the chilling Facebook Live video, that painted the clearest picture of his intentions. There was no ambiguity in the footage, no room for misinterpretation. It captured Anthony's deliberate path to the Southwell home, his aggressive entry, and the fatal shots fired in a frenzy of misguided rage. In the sterile confines of the interrogation room, the detective's patient probing was less about gathering facts and more about guiding Anthony to a point of introspection, a moment where he might recognize the folly of his claims and accept the reality of his transgressions. Yet, even as the walls closed in, Anthony clung to his narrative, his mind a turbulent sea of half-truths and fantasy, resisting the tide of accountability that surged inexorably towards him. Ultimately, the trial and subsequent conviction of Anthony Gelia for first-degree felony murder, first-degree home invasion, and felony firearm charges underscored the failure of his defense rooted in delusion. His life sentence was not just a punitive measure, but a stark reminder of the tragic consequences when reality is eclipsed by the shadows of a mind unmoored from truth. The haunting specter of a fabricated Anastasia could not absolve him of the blood on his hands, nor could it bring solace to those forever altered by a night that never should have been. The story of Anthony Gelia stands as a critical testament to the destructive power of unchecked paranoia and the devastating impact of failing to confront one's inner demons before they manifest into catastrophic reality. In the end, Anthony Gelia's warped sense of reality crumbled under the weight of undeniable truth. The phantom of Anastasia, a mere figment of his paranoia, could not shield him from justice. Convicted and condemned, Anthony now faces a lifetime of reflection on the catastrophic folly that transformed delusion into a deadly tragedy. The lives fractured by his hands serve as a stark reminder of the perilous path carved by unchecked fear and fantasy, a haunting legacy etched into the annals of true crime.